I'm Paul Grantham, Assistant Vice President for Communication Services at Duke. The recent incidents that led to outrage and protest in nearly every corner of this country have highlighted systemic racism that is inextricably woven into many aspects of our society and our culture, and therefore have implications for us here at Duke too. I'm pleased today to be joined by Luke Powery, Dean of Duke Chapel, and Kim Hewitt, Vice President for Institutional Equity, to talk with us today about these implications and how we navigate the turmoil and pain of these last few weeks. Luke, let me start with you. As Dean of the Chapel, you've served as a voice of reflection and guidance and hope for our community. You've also likely served this week as a counselor for many in pain. Can you share how recent events have affected members of our community that you've encountered?
Through these events, I've been in touch with some of our community members in different ways. And I would say it's a full spectrum of sentiment and emotions and reactions. I would say from sadness and sorrow, grief, lamentation, anger, that these kinds of events still exist in 2020. I mean, we're not 1620, it's 2020. And there's still these kinds of racialized incidents that are happening. And the irony of having a space rocket or spacecraft go up while the riots and the protests were happening on the ground, it's almost as if our technology has outpaced our humanity in so many ways. And but I would say also there are people who are resolved to act towards making change. I think that's a reaction too, and I would say as for some a greater sense of empathy with the marginalized, an awakening of some sort in their own life and heart, again, and then the resolve to try to make some sort of concrete change going forward. So it's been a wide range of reactions.
Kim, let me turn to you for a minute. And the murder of George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer in Minneapolis has clearly served as a catalyst for many to reject the systemic racism in all aspects of our society. It should also force us to ask some hard questions of ourselves. How do we look at ourselves as a community at Duke to support change and better live out the values of respect and trust and inclusion that we have?
I've been thinking a lot about how we look at our history at Duke and, the progress that we've made that's been positive and where we want to go. And then really how we take the moment we're in right now where there's a lot of energy. And like Luke was saying, more people there's sort of awakening for some people. So we're seeing greater engagement on the issue of racism, or even how people understand structural racism or systemic racism, not just, simply not liking someone because of how they look, but understanding, systems of oppression and privilege, and how we kind of take this moment to help us sustain our efforts. So, we know, we come from this history where our institution was, designed by someone who couldn't even have attended, and now we have, this great diverse student body, and we see more faculty, and we see leadership of color. But how do we push ourselves to the next step and kind of sustain this energy now to help us do that, so that we have, we're producing people who are going out in the world and being good citizens and really understand how they can play a part to change, what is like our deepest, I think, sort of most difficult and, problem in our country that just really seems to persist in many ways. So I'm hopeful that this kind of energy that everyone's feeling will continue, and it won't just be a moment, but we'll see this sort of galvanizing desire for change.
Luke, you mentioned something around action earlier, and I want to come back to that. I've always understood faith as a being made up of both belief and action. And I'm sure most people in our community, probably believe racism is wrong. But why and how is it important for people to act on that belief?
Sure. I think with that question, one of the things that comes to mind, at least within the Christian tradition, is in the New Testament, this phrase that faith without works is dead. From regardless of your religious tradition, in many ways, that if there is no action, if faith is only contemplative contemplation without action, then in many ways your faith is a lie, I would say, or your belief. If you only believe and do not act on that belief, your inactivity makes your belief a lie. And is actually dead. I mean, for me, faith is both contemplation and action. And I think of Dr. King had this quote talking about the existence of God, but this idea that your life service should match your lip service. And so really without the integration, and so for me, it's the life of integrity. One lacks integrity if one's belief is not matched by one's action. And so the goal is always, how do I live an integrative life, a life of integration, a life of integrity that pulls together what I believe? In this case, if I believe racism is wrong, then how do I enact that? How do I put that into action in some concrete ways and systems and structures, who I am, not just what I believe and think, but to live into a life that's, I think, a fuller life of integrity. So it's vital. I mean, I think it's, who you are is also what you do. And that becomes so critical when we start talking about issues like racism.
It's interesting listening to you talk about that. It reminds me of the Duke values. And I think too often we think of values in terms of these abstract ideas or ideals. But maybe you can speak to that in terms of how, Duke has put these values out, but then asked us as a community to live those, not just hold them up as these are the concepts that we believe in.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I think what I really have appreciated about being at Duke and the leadership, even with changes, is the sort of deep aspirations to actually do what is right and to live into these values. I think the challenge is even in I think a greater clarity of what the values are now being put out there in communications across the university and the health system so that there's one Duke. The greater challenge is, how do you make the community aware of the values? And then what do these values look like on the street, so to speak? What do they look like on campus so that they become real? And it's not just words on a page in a piece of literature, but now you see the values being manifested through the community's life together. I think that's the challenge, that's the aspiration, that's the hope around some of our values now, that we can actually try to embody them and live them so that what we say, again, has integrity, even as an institution and an organization, that we can really be who we say we are, or who we desire to be. I mean, institutions and people are always becoming, so we never fully arrive at their aspirations in many ways, but we get glimpses and we can live into it, but we're always becoming, we're always growing, I hope, and striving to that vision of what it means to be this inclusive community at Duke.
Thanks, Luke. I appreciate you talking about that. Kim, let me come back to you. Clearly, the hard work of identifying and changing inequities in the broader system of our society lies ahead. What are some of the things that we can begin to do for that work? What type of programs or conversations or activities can we look to from Duke that might help?
So I think there's a lot of activity around, diversity efforts and inclusion and equity efforts at Duke. And one of the challenges is that in a place that's very decentralized, where you've got all this interesting and great work happening, how do we create some accountability for reaching these, moving towards some of these aspirational goals is I think a question. And I'm sort of somewhat new to Duke. This is my 9th or 10th month, I think. But that's one of the things I've been thinking about. So where I think it's always important to reinforce those who are sort of motivated without an accountability structure, and to continue to educate the choir. But how do we have more of a sort of a consensus around where we want to see ourselves go, and create some accountability for it. So I think that will be really important. We have a group of, right now in my office, we have a pretty large group of people who work either officially their role is connected to diversity, or unofficially that comes together. And so we're going to be using that group to really think about maybe creating some more formalized structures to help us focus as we advance our goals.
Thanks, Kim. Let me ask a follow-up question, because I feel like this notion of systemic racism has been a burden for many in the Black community for years. But I feel like solving the problem will take, it's not just a problem of the Black community. It's a much broader problem that requires input and participation by broader sections of our society. So let me ask, what role can and should people who look like me, people who have privileges that many in our society do not, what role should we play in this process? So
I think, this is everybody's issue and everybody's work. And I think for white people, I think it's important, I always think, to think about how are you in community with people who aren't like you, that if you really want to see change, understand someone who's different, you have to be in relationship with people who aren't exactly like you. I mean, and that you can accomplish that. I mean, I wouldn't recommend like just going around campus and looking for someone and saying, can I be your friend? But really thinking about your own interactions and where are you genuinely having relationships with others who aren't like you? And then even just doing simple things like making a commitment to reading something about a person's life, an African-American person, or somebody whose experience is different from your own, or seeing some theater, or making a commitment to help push against being uncomfortable, and where you see something, injustice is happening, or even where you see someone make a comment that's inappropriate, to challenge yourself to be the one who will intervene, so that it doesn't always rest on your colleague or someone of color to be the person to stand up. I mean, there have been times, I can think of one time in particular where I was in a meeting and I could feel my blood boiling over the issue, and it was related to the Black community, and a white colleague was the one who stepped in and said really what I wanted to say. And so really being able to appreciate and that your allies will take up some of the kind of emotional labor that comes along with dealing with this issue. And then again, kind of going back to the theme of accountability, thinking about how you can hold yourself accountable for taking some steps.
Thanks, Kim. That's very helpful. Luke, let me come back, and I hesitate to ask this question because I know it's difficult for a wound to heal in the body until the root cause has been addressed. But how do our communities begin to heal from these painful events?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. I think what Kim was just talking about, and what you were asking, this is I think, a human issue. And what we're talking about at its heart is human beings. Whether we're talking about coming together for concrete actions, or whether we're talking about those who receive the brunt of oppression in whatever form that might take, we're talking about human beings, which historically this has been the issue, where those who are different, look different based on race or whatever it might be, are not quite as human. And so for me, a starting place is really to acknowledge that all people, and of course I'm an ordained religious guy, divinity professor, all people are children of God, are created in the image of God. It's fundamental. And then if we think about human, the word human, coming from the Latin humus, meaning from the earth, that we all are from dust, right? We're all dust as human beings, and to dust we will return. And so what does it mean to operate with what I call through the lens of the ethics of dust? What does it mean if we come to the recognition that we all are human beings, regardless of what we look like, and recognizing that race is a social construction, right? That really, and has been used historically to objectify people and create hierarchies, et cetera, which is what we have, the inheritance, the colonial inheritance, but fundamentally that we are all human beings. That's the starting place for me. But then with that recognition, look, you acknowledge the wound, you acknowledge the pain, you name it, but then you tell the truth about it. So there's some truth telling. And then you lament it, you grieve it, that this is the way life is, that this America is still this way. But then you also, which is why people might critique, let's move to healing, let's move to reconciliation so quickly. So you tell the truth, you lament, but then you also seek justice. And you seek equity in the systems and structures. And that takes us on the path toward what I would call, and others have called, the beloved community, the human community, to recognize that we are all, I need you to survive, as the gospel singer Hezekiah Walker says, that we need each other to move, to make change. But fundamentally, it's a recognition that we are all human beings. And that, in many ways, that's what these protests have been about. I mean, from the civil rights movement prior, I am a man. Yeah, I am a man and woman. I'm a human being. And so for me to get to healing, we have to have that recognition fundamentally, that we are all to be whole, to be healed. We can't fully be whole without that one that we might denigrate or marginalize. That to really find communal healing requires all of us to the recognition that we are all, if I can take this language, one body, one human body, and to function and move in the world, to flourish as human beings fundamentally. There's a deep recognition that, yeah, there's been hurt and there's a wound, but we're going to tell the truth about it. We're going to lament it. We're going to seek justice. And then hopefully that's on the path towards healing. It's Rumi, the poet, the Persian poet. I love this quote from the 13th century, the poet. It says, the wound is the place where the light enters you. The wound is the place where the light enters you. And so there's the possibility of light. There's the possibility of hope for the Duke community, for the nation, for the world. And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we might continue to do better, live better, be better human beings.
On behalf of the Duke community, I am grateful to have you both as leaders at our institution. I want to thank you for your words of wisdom, for your words of guidance, your words of healing. I hope and pray this is a conversation that will continue throughout our community and beyond. I want to thank our viewers and would ask them to continue to follow this conversation and others on workingatduke.edu or follow us on Facebook and Twitter for this conversation. So thank you both again for your time today.
Produced by the Office of Communication Services, online at today.duke.edu/working.